Welcome to Strip Coverlet, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Fort, and we are here for the first in a six-part series as we float along with Henrik Ibsen through The Wild Duck. Through one act, I am not sure from whence that title comes, but being as experienced, if that may be the right word with Ibsen, as I am by now, I assure you, it will come back. It will be a meaningful title. But this is Act 1, so what are we going to do? We're going to go through and we're going to say a little bit about what happened in the act before we get into a conversation about the literary goings-on in this act. So what happened here, Verley is hosting a party, and we are privy to the servant staff as they work the party and run the rumor mill. Verley's son has just returned home. He was off working. He was off being a businessman, being in some type of business, as what we learn early on is that Verley is very business-based and seemingly assumes that his son should be too. Enter Old Ekdal, as it were, credited in the players list as being simply Old Ekdal. Fancy that. Ekdal wants Pedersen to let him into the office, and after some goings back and forth, Pedersen goes ahead and lets him pass. Turns out Ekdal is an experienced hand, experienced enough to have found himself all the way to prison at some point. Herein lies the rumor mill as we are getting it by the servant staff. We get a peek into the party and some of the conversations therein, in which Gregors confides to Verley, neither of whom do we know yet, that his paranoia is running wild because the table at which they were both seated 13 instead of 12. 13 instead of 12, why would that worry someone? I don't know. Maybe we'll get there. But it is, in fact, Gregors that is worried already at this point. And it turns out Gregors is the son of Verley. And we have, surprise, surprise, in an Ibsen play, some family dynamics to be had. A little more dialogue confirms that the party is, in fact, for Verley's son, Gregors, whose best friend is Yalmar, a photographer, who happens to be Ekdal's son. So we are already hearing familiar tunes for what will be a Henrik Ibsen play, already getting the vines twisted. Turns out Ekdal had a catastrophe, which had at least temporarily driven a wedge between the sons and the fathers themselves. Well, between the son and between the father and the father. We will learn in a minute that it didn't quite drive a wedge between Verley and Yalmar. A catastrophe which this catastrophe in which Ekdal was involved afflicted Verley greatly. That is what we're being led to believe at this point in the play. Nonetheless, Verley was the one who funded Yalmar's studies in order to become a photographer. He was the one pulling the strings there, and at the same time, he went ahead and found Yalmar a wife. So that wife happened to be a former staffer of the Verley estate known as Gina. The party resumes in high spirits until old Ekdal and the bookkeeper emerge from the office, and they go ahead and flower a bit of hysteria and hush among the crowd. Hysteria and hush, I guess that is a bit of a contradictory phrase, but a hysterical hush, if that exists. Yalmar is embarrassed and decides to leave. He decides that, so as he's deciding to leave, Gregor says, hey, where you stand, old buddy, old pal, let me maybe come by later. And Yalmar says, no, that's not a good idea. You shouldn't come past. Don't come by. Leave me alone. When I leave, you don't come see me. That's it. Which seems strange. He says that his house is a bit of a morose place. I'm assuming that we will understand why later. In the wake of this, Gregor's calls to his father, who reluctantly agrees to a private conversation, a private chat, where it turns out we learn that Ekdal's big sin was breaching a contract, and felling government timber where he was supposed to be felling other timber on a contract signed by Verley. We have convoluted family relations, and we have difficult money contracts. These are things which Ibsen loves to play with. Then Gregers starts picking a fight with his old man, which quickly turns into accusations that Verley had relations with Gina. Verley is offended, but offers Gregers partnership in his firm to sort of keep him around a little bit. That way, Verley can more or less retire. Gregers is suspicious, but Verley confesses his loneliness, even though he is considering marrying Mrs. Sorby. Or he certainly seems very interested in Mrs. Sorby. So it is... Oh yeah, one other little thing that we should mention is that Verley's wife and Gregor's mother has passed, and apparently had tiffs with Verley. Didn't like him very much, and that's why Verley assumes that Gregors doesn't like him very much, or at all. So, already, Act 1, there's 3 things that I know before even opening the book that we're going to get into when I pick up an Ibsen play. Number 1, the names suck. Damn it, the names suck. Number 2, there's going to be a lot going on. Number 3, my summary of the act is going to be more words than the act itself, because there are so many. The profound thing about Ibsen is how much he is able to do through very little. Everything comes through dialogue, pretty much. Not only that, everything comes to us through dialogue in a correct voice for the character, and that voice changes depending on the character who is receiving the dialogue. There is a bit of what is known as double voicing that happens in Ibsen. And double voicing is... one part of double voicing is that a character makes an assumption about what the other character knows, and there is a distance between what the character is assuming the other character knows and what the audience knows. This is often seen as an error on the writer's behalf, something that the writer has screwed up. I think that oftentimes when it is seen that way, it is misunderstood by the critic, because most of conversation in the real world is based on your assumptions from where the other person is coming from. So a lot of the double voicing that we get in Ibsen really is because of a character's judgment on another character. So what we're setting up here is a hard-working, independent son as jealous of an estranged friend because of the affliction that because of the affection of a cold father who now seemingly has a new woman, despite the fact that son is jealous of his friend despite the fact that he doesn't like the father anyway because of the father's old woman. So there's a lot going on there. So what is going on within those character dynamics that is left out of that little summary is the story of old Ekdal. One thing that is absolutely necessary to observe here. Old Ekdal is called Old Ekdal because people refer to Yalmar from time to time as Ekdal. He is a grown man. He is a man in the society. So he is worthy of the name Ekdal. This is a sign of respect. Ekdal is a man's last name. He owns his own family. Give him his name, his proper name, Ekdal. Because he is Ekdal, his father has to be known as Old Ekdal. Why do I say this? I say this because Verley is Verley. What we're looking at is, let me see here. Verley is the last name. Gregor's Verley is his son. So everyone knows Gregor's is, I guess, the correct pronunciation, Gregor's. I am going to fall into my lazy Midwestern tongue and say Gregor's on occasion. But he is called Gregor's, his first name, because he is not the man that his father is. His father, being the most important member of the Verley clan, is known as Verley, simply as Verley. Not Old Verley, because young Gregor's has not yet earned his name. So, adding to that dynamic, Gregor's father acts like he doesn't know him, while Yalmar acts like he does not know his father. Yalmar is known as Ekdal by some members of the society because he is the most important member of that clan. He is simply Ekdal. Old Ekdal is Old Ekdal. He may have been the leader of a family at one point, but he is no longer deserving of that respect of simply being Ekdal. It could be, if he were Ekdal, that Yalmar could be young Ekdal, couldn't he? Or little Ekdal. But he is not. He is simply Ekdal. While Gregor's is Gregor's because he's not Verley. Verley is Verley. And the tension between Gregor's and Verley is often as if Verley does not know Gregor's, right? He comes, when they enter the scene early on, they enter at each other's side as if they were friends, not as father and son. Later, when Old Ekdal is making his escape, Ekdal, Yalmar, does not act like that's his father, ignores him, tries to let all of this pass right over. Don't notice me. Don't look at me, Dad. I'm not here. And neither are you, you son of a bitch. You've ruined our name. So there are a lot of dynamics going on right there that we're already knees deep in the muck. Adding to this, I can't remember what page it was, early on, I made a note, I talked about it in the summary. Gregor's not suspicious. The fact that there were 13 people at their table, and he noticed this. This is not a subtlety. This is something that we too are supposed to notice. It is pointed out by the characters in the dialogue. Because of this, the important thing to notice is from that point forward. God, I wish I had marked it, but I don't think I did. It's like page 4 or something. Maybe even earlier than that. They come in and say, page 3, right here. I don't think anybody noticed it, Gregors. Noticed what? Did you not notice it either? Or it's Verley who noticed. I'm sorry, I've got that wrong. What do you mean? We were 13 at a table, Gregors. Indeed. Were there 13 of us? This is pointed out to the audience, regardless of who's paying attention. This is not something that is hidden in the scene to notice if you notice it. It's given to us so that from page 3 in Act 1, we are to be suspicious. We are to be on the lookout. Verley himself is paranoid. We are supposed to be looking forward to trouble from page 3 onward. We are to assume the nature of this play from that point. Why are we to be suspicious? There's lots of things going on. This is from page 7. Mrs. Sorby to the guests in the other room. This way, if you please, gentlemen. Whoever wants a glass of punch must be so good as to come in here. The flabby gentleman comes up to Mrs. Sorby. Surely, it isn't possible that you have suspended our cherished right to smoke. Mrs. Sorby. Yes, no smoking in here. In Mr. Verley's sanctum, Chamberlain. In Mr. Verley's sanctum, Chamberlain. The thin-haired gentleman. When did you enact these stringent amendments on the cigar law, Mrs. Sorby? This is how we learn that there is more to do between Mrs. Sorby and Verley than meets the eye, than employer and employee. This is how we learn it. It is because Mrs. Sorby is enacting her own rules in Verley's house. This is something that is not communicated to Gregors. This is something Gregors is off camera as this happens. This is something that is so sneakily done, so well done, that without telling us, hardly with even showing us, we sneak this idea past the audience because we understand you make the rules in your own house. That doesn't sneak past the audience. The idea of it sneaks past the audience. It is something brazenly put, so brazenly put, that one might assume themselves mistaken to interpret it. On page 6, so what we're looking at there is we're looking at someone running a household. We're looking at someone who is very comfortable in that household. We're looking at a dynamic between a man and a woman in a household. Another dynamic between a man and a woman in a household has already been presented to us by this point in the play. That is between Yalmar and Gina. There is a tinge of jealousy, more than a tinge of jealousy, in Gregor's interactions with Yalmar over those things which had been perpetuated by his father in Gregor's absence. You mean you found my old buddy a job and a wife while I had to go off and bust my ass in order to make a name for myself? And you gave all these things to my scrub friend who stuck around, the one with the screw-up father? So on page 6 and into 7, Gregors rises and moves about a little. Tell me, Was it after your engagement? Was it then that my father, was it then that you began to take up photography? And Yalmar says, yeah, precisely. What is Pops waiting for Gregors to become a man, to become his own man, in order to fund his dreams? Is that what we're looking at here? It seems by the end of the act that it is not. Gregors is being tempted back in to the family business by the end of the act. So, moving on to page 8, we have to remember Yalmar is a photographer. He's been trained in photography by, essentially, not by, but because of, due to Verley's interest in him. So Verley gifted photography to Yalmar. He also gifted Yalmar, essentially, his wife. His wife comes from a family business of having set up an eatery. Gina's mother ran an eatery. So Gina's mother ran an eatery. Yalmar is a photographer. And on the heels of receiving this information, we get this little bit of dialogue from the flabby gentleman. And he's called the flabby gentleman. I'm not just making this up. I'm not one to throw around names. The flabby gentleman says, you ought to, they're talking about looking at a picture album. And the flabby gentleman notes, it's very good for the digestion to sit and have a look at pictures. Here we're tying together the ideas of running an eatery and being a photographer. He's talking to Yalmar, in fact. It's good for the digestion to sit and look at pictures. So I think that's something that we're going to want to keep in the back of our minds moving forward. Exactly what is going on with that? Why are we so sure to tie together digestion, Gina's mother, and photography, Gregor's father, right? These are the gifts from these individuals. These are the family lineages that are being given to us, being passed down to us. Is this setting up some symbol for the future? The final thing I would like to talk about is something that seems to be thrown in here almost nonsensically at the end of this act. Almost nonsensically. Gregors is yelling at his father. His father is acting very hurt. And Gregors, having been offered a place in the family firm, essentially so that Verley could retire, Gregors is suspicious of this, and he decides, look, I gotta go. It's been a long night. Gotta take off. As he's leaving, he points towards the background and says, look, father, the Chamberlains are playing blind man's bluff with Mrs. Sorby. Good night and goodbye. Do you remember why Verley wanted to retire? Verley wanted to retire because his eyes were giving him fits. His eyes were strained and painful all the time. But your eyes were never good, Dad, says Gregors. Your eyes were never good. Why do I say that? The Chamberlains are playing blind man's bluff. Here is Gregor, suspicious of the things that his father is doing, saying, hey, the Chamberlains are playing blind man's bluff, blind man's lie. The Chamberlains are playing Verley's lie with Mrs. Sorby. Where are we going there? So that is all I have for this Act 1 of The Wild Duck by Henrik Ibsen. It has been a wild ride so far with Henrik Ibsen. Like I said earlier, there's already so much going on. This is 16 pages, and we've already got so much going on. But that is all I have for this episode. I hope to see you next week for Act 2. We will have Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, Act 4, Act 5, and then a review of the play by Henrik Ibsen.